عليه وعلى آله. نحن في روضات الرسول حضور طالبين رضا وحسن قبول. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله 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 بفضلك كل جدنا يا خير من إليه الملاذ بانكسار وذلة وذهول. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله 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 بفضلك كل فاسأل الله فينا كل عناية لننال المنى في وقت الحلول. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله الله بفضلك كل لك قدر عظيم ليس يضاهى، ورسالة تفوق كل رسول. الله الله يا مولانا، الله 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 بفضلك كل أنت باب الإله في كل خير، من أتى فاز بالرضا والوصول. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله 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 بفضلك كل سر في الأنبياء قد أتاهم من علاكم مؤيدا بنقول. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله 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 بفضل لي قد تشفعت في أمور إلهي بالنبي المشفع المقبول. الله 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 يا مولانا، الله الله بفضلك كل من حط رحله بكريم لا أقصى المنى وكل السول. الله الله يا مولانا، الله 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 بفضلك قد شكرنا الإله في كل وقت حيث من بزهرة لرسوله المدد المدد. يا رسول الله واسقنا بالمدد يا حبيب الله، وكذاك لكل من في بيقيع من صحاب كذا نسل بتولي المدد المدد. يا رسول الله واسقنا بالمدد يا حبيب الله، وكذاك لكل زوج وبنت وابن منجي الأنام يوم الحلول المدد المدد. واسقنا بالمدد يا حبيب الله، وكذاك لكل من في أحد من شهاد كذا عم الرسول مدد المدد. يا الله اسقنا بالمدد يا حبيب الله، قد طلبنا بهم تمام السلام في ميسر لأرضنا والدخول المدد المدد. يا رسول الله واسقنا بالمدد يا حبيب الله، وطالبنا النجاة في يوم حشر وسلاما من كل فظ جهولي. المدد المدد واسقينا بالمداد يا حبيب الله. ربي صل على النبي وآل وصحاب وتابع بشمولي. المدد المدد يا رسول الله واسقينا بالمداد يا حبيب الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله. عودي يا ليالي الرضا، عودي يا ليالي الرضا، بالأنس الذي قد مضى، بالأنس الذي قد مضى. قد رضي المحبوب، قد رضي المحبوب، ونلنا المطلوب، ونلنا المطلوب. ونادى منادي الشرف، عفى الله عما سلف. ونادى منادي الشرف، عفى الله عما سلف. يا من عودونا الوفاء، أنتم حسبنا وكفى. يا من عودونا الوفاء، أنتم حسبنا وكفى. يا أهل المعروف، يا أهل المعروف، والصفح المألوف، والصفح المألوف. عبد بالذنوب اعترف، عفى الله أما سلف. عبد بالذنوب اعترف، عفى الله عما سلف. عودي يا ليالي الرضا، عودي يا ليالي الرضا، بالأنس الذي قد مضى، بالأنس الذي قد مضى. قد رضي المحبوب، قد رضي المحبوب، ونلنا المطلوب، ونلنا المطلوب. ونادى منادي الشرف، عفى الله عما سلف. ونادى منادي الشرف، عفى الله ما سلف. عبد عنكم لم يحول، عبد عنكم لم يحول، ومن صدكم قد يحول، ومن صدكم قد يحول. وصل المهجور، وصيل المهجور، واجبر المكسور، واجبر المكسور. وارحمه شديد الأسف، عفى الله عما سلف. وارحمه شديد الأسف، عفى الله عما سلف. فعودي يا ليالي الرضا، عودي يا ليالي الرضا، بالأنس الذي قد مضى، بالأنس الذي قد مضى قد رضي المحبوب قد رضي المحبوب ونلنا المطلوب ونلنا المطلوب ونادى منادي الشرف عفى الله عما سلف ونادى منادي الشرف عفى الله عما سلف أفمن لي غيركم أرتجي من لي غيركم أرتجي وإلى بابي من ألتجي وإلى باب من ألتجي ما لي فقطي ما لي فقطي إلا سادتي إلا سادتي ما لي عنكم منصرف عفى الله عما سلف عنكم منصرف عفى الله عما سلف عودي يا ليالي الرضا عودي يا ليالي الرضا بالأنس الذي قد مضى بالأنس الذي قد مضى قد رضي المحبوب قد رضي المحبوب ونلنا المطلوب ونلنا المطلوب ونادى منادي الشرف عفى الله عما سلف ونادى منادي الشرف عفى الله عما سلف اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله.
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه يوم الدين نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير ونفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله سنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم الدعاء للهدى والدلالة للخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته قربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله ولا قوة إلا بالله. عدد قراءة كتب أكتب أبدا العابدين وداهر الداهرين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من أن أضل أو أضل أو أزل أو أزل أو أظلم أظلم أو أجهل أو يجهل علي. اللهم أغننا بالعلم وزينا بالحلم وأكرمنا بالتقوى وجملنا بالعافية يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. So we are talking today about the Prophet ﷺ's generosity and his bravery and his humility. And we've spent collectively as a group the past couple of days talking about the Prophet ﷺ in general, his character traits, his qualities, the aspects of his life that all of us should try our utmost best to embody in our lives. We have to remember that this religion is not a religion of information, right? It's not just about gathering facts and storing them. If that were the case, right, there are plenty of people out there who aren't even Muslim who have more information than us. right? There are things that are inanimate objects that have, these like phones can hold thousands of books, millions of, pieces of data and things like that. So it's not just the information itself that is what makes this religion special. Rather, what we have to strive to do, we have to remember, is that our religion is one about transformation, number one. And more importantly, transforming yourself to be like the people of God, specifically the Prophet ﷺ. Specifically the Prophet ﷺ. So we have to strive to take the qualities we hear about him, take that and put it in our own hearts and act upon it. Because otherwise, it's just empty information coming in one ear and leaving out the other, right? Coming in one ear and leaving out the other. And ultimately, that transformative process of taking his qualities and his traits and implementing in your own lives, that's the whole point of this religion, right? This religion, it didn't come down as a book in the literal sense. There was no Iḥyā Ulūm came from the sky and we read it and then khalas, like that was Islam. No, Islam came in the form of a man who taught his companions, who taught their companions, who taught their companions, and so on and so forth until now. So this religion is a religion of a study of men of God. It's a study of a man of God and trying your best to emulate them in all aspects of your life. And so today we're talking about 3 aspects of the Prophet ﷺ's life: his generosity, his bravery, and his humility. Now before we start, there's one thing to keep in mind, and that is that the best way to understand the Prophet ﷺ and his qualities is to take yourself out of the modern context. Because he lived in a time and place, it wasn't like it is today. If I told you, for example, you hear stories about the Prophet ﷺ, how he was, like the gifts he used to receive, how he used to act with his companions and things like that. A lot of it might make sense literally, right? But you'll be more astounded by his character when you recognize the world he was coming from. So for example, if I told you, for example, that so-and-so in our time and place, he's so humble. He accepts clothing that has holes in it as gifts. Little do you know that clothing he accepts as gifts is actually designer clothing, jeans you can buy that are really expensive, that come with holes in them, That's not a testament to his humility. That just means he has someone who gives him fancy gifts, So to really understand him, the Prophet ﷺ, and his qualities, you really have to acquaint yourself with the time and place he was living with, which is a pre-modern time. And you can still understand that time and place through travel, right? Not even that far. Even in Pennsylvania, there are people that you can meet who live that sort of simplistic lifestyle. Some of them might not even be Muslim. But the point is, to really understand what the stories people relate about him, we have to put ourselves in that kind of mindset and recognize the time and place he was speaking from, or the narrator was speaking from. So let's start. So he says in the book, we are in the PDF on page 32. So he says, did he read the Arabic and English too? يقولون عربية. إنجليزي بس. Okay. He says, an exposition of his generosity and munificence. The Prophet ﷺ was the most generous and munificent of men. In the month of Ramadan, he was like a generous wind bringing forth rain, withholding nothing. This is an amazing metaphor. The narrator of the hadith is who? Is the specific hadith was narrated by Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu. He's describing the Prophet ﷺ's generosity like a wind. So think about the wind. Does the wind discriminate when it comes across the land? Whatever comes in front of it benefits from the wind. It doesn't matter if it's a tree or an animal or a building. Whatever is in its path receives its benefit. The wind, the sun, these metaphors, it's non-discriminatory generosity. Non-discriminatory generosity. If you're there, he's going to give it to you, mashallah. He's going to give you his generosity. So he says, in the month of Ramadan, he was like a generous wind bringing forth rain, withholding nothing. So it's non-discriminating, number one. Number two, he says, Like, these are people living in the desert. He says, a generous wind bringing forth rain. So the most valuable resource in the desert is what? It's water, right? On top of that, it's a gift that gives life. So it's whatever when rain comes, it's not just a valuable resource, it's a perpetuating blessing. It brings life, it sustains life. And that's the very first sentence the author uses to describe the Prophet's generosity. He was like a wind, it doesn't discriminate, it just gives. It doesn't just give anything, it gives rain, the most valuable thing you could think of at that time and place. And it's not just valuable in terms of, money, it's something that will sustain life. It will cause things to flourish. When describing the Prophet ﷺ, Ali would say, this is Ali, his cousin, radiallahu anhu. The messenger of God was the most generous of men. His breast was the most generous of breasts. And he was the most truthful of men in speech. So the translator says his breast was the most generous of breasts. But in Arabic, it's awsa' al-sadr, or wasi' al-sadr. And what that really means is he was someone he was very welcoming, he was very patient, and he was very, very slow to get angry, if he ever got angry at all. So he was someone who was halim, sabur. He was very patient, and he was someone who was very, doesn't react negatively, right? And he was someone who was very welcoming. He was the most diligent in fulfilling promises, the gentlest of nature and the kindest of them in companionship. Whoever saw him unexpectedly would be awestricken, and whoever got acquainted with him would love him. Whoever described him would say, I saw neither before him nor after him anyone like him. This is what the Prophet ﷺ was like. Even before he became a prophet, he was like this. Even before he became a prophet, he was like this. There are narrations, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was a young man, he said that he used to hear the stones of Mecca give him salams and say to him, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah. So he's a young man living in Mecca, and he would hear inanimate objects telling him he's a prophet of God. So he knew he was a prophet before he received a revelation, number one. Number two, his character was phenomenal even before he became a prophet. There's a narration that when he first received revelation, he fled. The first thing he did after he received revelation in the cave of Hira, he went to his wife, Sayyidina Aisha, or Sayyidina Khadija, radhiallahu anha. And he went to her and he told her what's happened, and he was like, cover me, comfort me, right? And what did she say about him? The first thing she said was, Wallahi, she basically reassured him that his Lord will never forsake him. And then what did she do? She began to list his character traits, right? She said what to him? She said, إِنَّكَ لَتَصِلَ الرَّحِمْ وَتَحْمِلَ الْكَلْ وَتُكْسِبُ الْمَعْدُومِ. Right? You're someone who you maintain ties of kinship. You're someone who you help the downtrodden. You are someone who gives to those who don't have anything. You're someone who stands with people of truth, people who have rights, right? So he was like this, everything we just read about him and everything we're going to read about him, he was like this even before he received revelation. And his character was so phenomenal before he received revelation, everyone in Quraysh admitted to his outstanding nature. To the point, right, as we've all heard their stories, he was known as Al-Amin, the most trustworthy. People would trust him with their most valuable belongings. For example, the story as well when they rebuilt the Kaaba, and they were thinking about who would be the person to put the last stone in the Kaaba, and they were disagreeing. And they agreed that khalas, the first person to come through that door the next day would be the person to do it. Who was that person? It was Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they were happy it was him. They thought he was khalas, he's the person for the job. We all love him. It was such that when his character was so phenomenal, right? It was so phenomenal that after he became a prophet, when he told people about his revelation, what did they do? The ones who were sincere, the ones who were, who didn't have arrogance or jealousy blinding them, to them it all made sense now. this amazing individual who walks amongst us. They're living in a land, remember, where people commit infanticide. People, the strong eat the weak. There's oppression everywhere. There's things that people admit are just terrible things happening, right? And he's standing there like just different from everyone else. His entire life is just different from everyone else. His character is something that's just absolutely incredible. And to them, now it just clicks. Now it makes perfect sense. That's why you're different. You're the prophet of God. So the ones who were sincere, who didn't have these jealousy or arrogance blinding them, it made sense to them. They saw him for what he really was, and it just affirmed their faith in him and his message. But the people who are blinded with arrogance and jealousy, like the people of Quraysh, for example, like Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, right? These people admitted to his outstanding nature. They admitted to his outstanding nature and his incredible character, but when he came to them saying, well, I'm a prophet of God, I received this revelation, believe in this. What happened? It was a straw that broke the camel's back. That, okay, this person is so much better than us in all attributes, and he says he's a prophet? No, khalas. They're not going to believe in him. And they admitted to this. There's a narration where a man, he came to Abu Jahl, and he came to him and he said, Abu Jahl, it's just me and you. No one's around, okay? No one's listening to us. Just give it to me straight. Is he actually a prophet? Is the Prophet ﷺ actually a prophet? And he said, he is. 100% he's a prophet, right? He admitted to it. But what did he say after that? He said, but our clan and Banu Hashim, the Prophet ﷺ's clan, we used to compete. We were neck and neck in everything. They used to be generous to the people who used to come to make pilgrimage, and we used to be generous to them. They had a certain amount of wealth, we had a certain amount of wealth. They had a certain amount of status, we had a certain amount of status. And then they come and they have a prophet. Where are we going to get a prophet from? So he looked at the Prophet ﷺ, and all he saw, even though he admitted to this man and to himself that the Prophet ﷺ was special, right? But his jealousy for him, his arrogance, it blinded him from the truth. And all he saw, he didn't see Muhammad Rasulullah. All he saw was Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, the Qurashi. And he was blinded from the truth. So the Prophet's character was incredible, from even before he became a prophet. And what's phenomenal is that if you really think about it, if you have someone, for example, if you were raising a child or you knew someone who was young, and from a young age you told them they were special. From a young age you told them they were special. Okay? How would that kid grow up? He'd be terrible. He'd be the worst kid in the world. It'd go to his ego, he'd flaunt it, he'd hold his head high above others. But the Prophet ﷺ, despite him being told by inanimate objects when he was a young man that he's a prophet of God, his character was still something so powerful, it made people become Muslim. There's a narration where a man, he came to the Prophet ﷺ, right? And he just admitted, this is not the face of a liar. This person, this face, no, he can't lie. He just became Muslim. So this is the nature of the Prophet ﷺ's character, something that is almost otherworldly, something that we can read about, we can try to understand, but ultimately, our best way to understand it is when we finally see him in the next life, inshaAllah ta'ala. He says, never was the Prophet, God bless him and give him peace, asked for anything but Islam, but that he gave it. A man once came to the Prophet ﷺ asking for something, and he gave a flock of sheep so large as to close the gap between two mountains. The man returned to his people and said, accept Islam, for Muhammad gives as one who fears not poverty. God bless him and give him peace, never said no when asked for something. When 90,000 dirhams are brought to him, God bless him and give him peace, he placed them on a mat, stood up and divided them up, and did not refuse anyone who asked until he distributed them all. On one occasion, a man came to him and asked him for money, to which he said, I have nothing. He says, I have nothing. Look at everything we read before and talking about his generosity. He gave a man enough sheep that would fill a valley. Okay, to put it into context, right? Imagine, right, this like Maqasid's fields are just full of cars, like a dealership. And someone just comes and tells you, all these cars are yours, go ahead and take them. You know? Or all these houses, the whole development is yours, go ahead and take it. You know? And he gave a valley full of sheep. A valley. This is not, you wouldn't call this a valley. A valley is huge, between mountains. Hundreds of animals. And he said, just take all of it and go. Yeah, go ahead, take it. The man got so excited, he didn't know what to do himself. Like, are you telling the truth? You know, really? So this is the kind of generosity the Prophet ﷺ had. With that generosity, he had nothing. It says it right there in the hadith. The man came to him and said, you know, I don't have anything. Can I have something? And what the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, I have nothing to give you. Why? Because his character was such that whenever wealth entered his possession, he would immediately give it away. He would immediately give it away. To the point where there's a story where someone gifted him something or gave him some wealth or some food. And as soon as he got it, he gave it away. He was such that if something came to him, he wouldn't sleep until he gave it away. So his wife, Aisha, comes to him and says that, oh, you know, did you save any of that food for us? Like, we don't have anything to eat today. He said, no, I didn't. And then she said to him, well, you should have. And he said, well, if you reminded me, I would have. If you reminded me, I would have. That's the kind of person he was. Nothing's in the house, nothing to eat, nothing to feed his family with, and he gets food, and what does he think about? Give it to someone else. He forgot about his own needs. He forgot about his own family's needs. That was how generous he was with his wealth. Now, that doesn't mean, don't take it out of context, that doesn't mean that don't spend on your family, let them starve, okay? That's not emulation of the Sunnah, right? They have a right upon you. In this case, this is something specific to the Prophet ﷺ, where his generosity was so grand that he would just forget, okay? He would just forget, number one. Number two, his generosity was also rooted in complete tawakkul upon Allah Ta'ala. Complete tawakkul upon Allah Ta'ala. He's someone who really recognized Allah's promise, right? Allah's testament, his declaration in the verse where he says that, where the sustenance of every single being on the face of the earth is guaranteed. And so his generosity was rooted in tawakkul. He wouldn't just give in a way that oppressed others. He gave understanding that people's needs would still be met. He gave understanding that Allah Ta'ala will still provide sustenance for the people. And he gave and didn't ask for anything in return. The Prophet's dua was mustajab. His dua was always answered. And so what would have stopped him from just raising his hands and asking Allah Ta'ala for wealth? What would have stopped him from asking Allah Ta'ala to be made a king, to be made a dignitary that is, you know, with lavish things and palaces and wealth and gold and silver? What would have stopped him? If he asked, he would have been given. If he asked, he would have been given. But he didn't ask. He gave. He didn't ask Allah for anything else in return. And he lived a humble life with nothing. So this man comes to him and he says what? He asked for something, right? And the Prophet says, I don't have anything, right? I have nothing. So a generous person would just stop there. But the Prophet goes beyond that. He says, I have nothing. But go and purchase something in my name, and when something of wealth comes to us, we will pay its price on your behalf. So he says, go, buy something in the market, tell them, I'll pay the storekeeper back. Okay, take a debt on my name. Take a debt on my name, and I'll pay it off whenever I get some money. Upon hearing this, Umar radiallahu anhu said, O Messenger of God, God has not imposed upon you what you cannot do. But the Prophet disliked that. And the man said, this is a mistranslation, it's a different man. The person who said this is a different man than the first man that came to ask. Okay? Spend and fear not reduction of wealth from the possessor of the throne, yani God. The Prophet heard this, smiled, and his happiness is visible in his entire face. So he tells the guy, I have nothing to give you, but go and buy, and I'll pay off the debt for that thing you buy. Okay? And as Umar sees this, and he knows the Prophet goes through. This is a man who spends, Umar ibn Khattab, he spent a lot of time with the Prophet, one of his closest companions. He was also his father-in-law. His daughter, Sayyidina Hafsa, married the Prophet. So he knows the Prophet's house, like the affairs of his house very intimately, very well. And he sees this and he's like, O Prophet of God, you don't have to do this. As in, like, you don't have to bear this kind of burden. Someone comes to you asking you for something and you don't have it. And he's like, I know you don't have it. My daughter lives with you. She's your wife, okay? And then you tell him to go buy something and I'll pay it off on your behalf. You don't have to go this far in your generosity. But what does another man say? This man, this third speaker is from the Ansar. He said what? He said, give, O Prophet of God, and don't be afraid. Allah won't forsake you. He will give you in return. And that made the Prophet happy because this person, he understand, like he made him happy because, again, his generosity is rooted in tawakkul. His generosity was rooted in the fact that he knew Allah will take care of him. On the Prophet returned from Hunayn, Bedouin Arabs came to him and persisted in asking him until they compelled him to climb up a tree, resulting in his cloak being snatched from him. The Messenger of God then stood up and said, give me back my cloak. If I had camels equal to the number of these trees, I would have divided them amongst you. And you will not find me miserly, a liar, or a coward. So the Prophet ﷺ, in this narration, right, this is after the Battle of Hunayn. So after what happens after a battle, there are spoils of war, right? There are spoils of war. And the spoils of war are worth a lot. You get animals, you get weapons, you get armor, you get whatever they had in terms of food. A lot of spoils of war come to the victor. So after the battle, the Prophet ﷺ, the Bedouin Arabs, so every time they mention Bedouin Arabs in the hadith, just imagine someone who's very simple, someone, who might be a bit brash, but comes from a good place, right? A more simpler person in a more simpler time. So they come and they're just like asking him to give them, okay? And the way this hadith is narrated, it makes it sound like, khalas, like perhaps he gave all the spoils away already, okay? But they're coming asking for more and more and more. And at this point, Prophet ﷺ, he didn't have anything to give away. So he mentioned in the translation that they made him climb a tree. I didn't understand that from the hadith personally. I understood that they basically forced him to a tree, to a specific tree, and he lost his shawl. Maybe perhaps he got snagged on a branch or something like that. In any case, it was a tree with a specific type of tree with a lot of thorns. So the Prophet ﷺ said what? He said what to them? He said, he asked for his shawl back and he said, if I had camels equal to the number of these trees or the thorns on these trees. So how many thorns would be on a single branch, let alone on a single tree? I would have divided them amongst you and you will not find me miserly, a liar, or a coward. So a camel. So to put it in perspective, a camel for that person, for someone like a Bedouin Arab, okay? It's like gifting them a house. It's like gifting them a house. Because the camel is their livelihood. They're nomadic people. The camel is what they use to transport their goods. They drink its milk. They benefit from its wool, from its hair. It's just, that's their life. So this is the level of his generosity. This is the level of his generosity. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was his generosity before he became a prophet. It was his generosity after he became a prophet. It was his generosity when he had things to give away. It was his generosity when he didn't have anything to give away and told people to go take out debts that he'd pay off. And this is him doing all this, not ever once asking Allah Ta'ala for wealth. Not ever once asking Allah Ta'ala for wealth. The next session talks about his bravery. He says, the Prophet, God bless him and give him peace, was the most courageous and bravest of men. Ali radiallahu anhu said, you have indeed seen me during the battle of Badr when we were seeking refuge in the Prophet ﷺ, who was the closest to the enemy. On that day, he was the most courageous of men. Ali also said, when the heat of battle intensified and the two parties met in combat, we would seek protection behind the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there would be no one closer to the enemy than he. It is said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke little and was a few words, but when he would order the people to fight, he would go forth resolutely. He was courageous in battle. The brave man would be the one nearest to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so the Prophet was the nearest to the enemy. So look at this. He was someone who was in the front lines, and his tenacity and his courage in battle was such that even the most courageous of the companions, Sayyidina Ali, look at this, Sayyidina Ali was one of the greatest warriors in Islam. It's narrated in a hadith that he dueled a man once in the battle of Khandaq. And his strength was so great, he cleaved the man in half with his sword. In another battle, okay, the Muslims were sieging a fortress. All right, sieging means like they're trying to get in, okay, like a castle or something like that. And they couldn't do it. And then Sayyidina Ali just said, "Khas, he'll take care of it." He stormed through the door, broke the door of the castle, and used it as a shield to fight the enemies and conquered it. After the battle, several men tried to just pick up the door from the ground, and they were unable to. Several men couldn't just lift it off the ground, and he used it as a shield during the fight. This is Sayyidina Ali. Look at what he's saying. This is a man, when he had his firstborn son, Sayyidina Hassan anhu, he named him Harb. He named his firstborn son Harb, war, okay? And then the word reached the Prophet ﷺ, was like, that's not the best name. Name him Hassan. He had a second son. He called him Harb. And then he was like, no, call him Hussein, this one. So this is the kind of person he was, the kind of warrior he was. And what does he say? He said, on that day, he was the most courageous of men. And he says, we were seeking refuge in the Prophet ﷺ. We, including himself, we were going, like looking for his protection on that day. It is said that the Prophet ﷺ spoke a little. Could you read that? Imran bin Hussein said, the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam never came upon a squadron but that he was the first to strike. They said, he was immensely courageous. When the idolaters surrounded him, he alighted from his mule and cried out, I am the Prophet, that is no lie. I am the son of Abdul Muttalib. No one was witnessed that day, had witnessed that day, anyone more powerful than him. So there's a narration in the Battle of Hunayn, when the Muslim army went out, and they saw the opposing army. The opposing army, their numbers were much more than the Muslims. Much more than the Muslims. And so a lot of the Muslims, they faltered. They were like taken aback by the numbers they saw, and they just hesitated a bit. But the Prophet ﷺ, he just marched. He was gone, okay? He was gone. He was riding a white mule. And they say that one of the companions, Sufyan, was holding back the reins of the mule because he realized the Prophet ﷺ was basically marching into battle by himself. And he was shouted that famous line of poetry. He said that. He said, Ana nabiyyun la kadhib, Ana ibn Abdul Muttalib. I am the Prophet, that is not a lie. I am the son of Abdul Muttalib. And he was marching, and they had to literally like pull his mule back, but he was still going forward. On a mule. Not even a horse or a camel, a mule. And he was going, he was gone. So his bravery was something that is unmatched. This is someone, from amongst his feats of bravery, there's a narration that there was a man from Quraysh one time. He intended to kill the Prophet ﷺ. He had a dagger, and he put it in his cloak or in his garment, and he hid it. And he waited till the Prophet ﷺ was making tawaf one day around the Kaaba. And then he went and was like, like scoping him out, like doing his assassin thing, trying to get close enough to stab him or something, okay? He's making tawaf with the Prophet ﷺ, maybe further away. The Prophet ﷺ, right, looks at him and says, like, what's going on? What's on your mind? How are you doing? And this person, right, the Prophet ﷺ knows, right, through what Allah told him, this person wants to kill him, okay? And he just confronts him and says, like, what's going on? How are you doing, right? And the person gets like startled, and he says, oh, nothing's happening, it's okay. And so a few tawafs later, a few orbits later, he sees him again, trying to execute his plan. And he asks him again, what's going on? How are you doing? And then the person was startled, and he said, nothing, I'm okay, I'm fine. And then the third time, after a few more orbits, he sees him again, and he asks him again, and he puts his hand on the man's chest and recites something. And the man said that, he said, Wallahi, all hate of the Prophet ﷺ left my heart. And he said that he was the most despicable of people to me, so much so he wanted to kill him. But after he put his hand on my chest and removed it, as soon as he removed it, he became the most beloved of people to me, became Muslim. This was his bravery. Someone came to kill him. And what did he do? He called them to Islam. He called them to Islam. The next section is about his humility. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This was someone, the Prophet sallallahu the greatest of creation, and he is the role model of humility for every single person in humanity. The greatest of creation, the person who knows that a time will come where every single person in humanity is in need of his supplication and his intercession. On the Day of Judgment, when Allah is angry with everyone, and no one is able to stop that anger. And he knows that he has the ability to do so. He knows how unique he is. He knows how much Allah loves him. He knows how, that he is the leader of humanity. So much so, right, that to enter Islam, to attain salvation, you have to say his name. You have to say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. This is someone who knows all that, and yet he is an example in humility. The Prophet ﷺ was the humblest of men despite his immense rank. He was the humblest of people despite his immense rank. Ibn Amir said, I saw him casting stones during Hajj, whilst riding upon a great she-camel. He neither struck nor whipped it, nor did he say, betake yourself. He rode on a donkey bareback, and notwithstanding that he had others ride behind him. So his humility extended even to animals. So he's throwing stones at Hajj, and he's not like expecting special treatment amongst a huge crowd, people to part ways and let him through. He's not expecting his camel to go to defy its own nature and to behave a certain way. He's not whipping it or making it do something. He's just going with the flow and being humble. He used to ride a donkey. And donkeys, I think this was mentioned on Friday, right? That donkeys, in parts of the world where donkeys are there, they're not exactly the most esteemed of mounts, okay? No one's going to be bragging they're riding a donkey, okay? But the Prophet used to ride a donkey. Furthermore, he also used to ride a donkey bareback, without a saddle or anything like that, which is a further testament to his humility. Why? Why is it? So, if you're someone of prestige, someone who is considered, considered high status, you would never ride an animal bareback, right? If anything, they'd put maybe you guys have seen, they'd put like a room, almost like a room on top of the animal, and you're sitting in luxury, okay? To put it into perspective, right? Like if someone is riding a donkey bareback, it's like if they were to drive a car that just barely passes inspection, okay? It just barely passes inspection. It might not have any, of the fancy gizmos and gadgets. So he used to ride a donkey bareback, and he used to ride with other people riding with him, other people riding with him. There's a narration where he went to visit a specific companion, and the companion had a son who was narrating the hadith. The son's name was Qais bin Sa'ad. So when the Prophet was done visiting, the father, Qais, brought a donkey out, or brought a mount out, and told the Prophet, okay, you can take this home, ride this home, And he told his son to accompany the Prophet home. So accompanying him in what? Like you take the reins and you lead the animal while the Prophet is riding it to the Prophet's house. The Prophet, what did he tell the boy? The narrator of the hadith, Sa'ad bin Qais. He told him, get up here with me, ride the mountain with me. And he said, no, I'm not going to ride it with you. And the Prophet said that, look, either you get up here and ride it with me, or just go home, I'll go by myself. All right? He doesn't want someone to lead his animal to his house. Okay? That's the equivalent of someone, like driving your car for you, like a chauffeur. And so in some narrations it said that he went home, in some narrations it said that he got on the mount and they rode together to his house. Another narration, the Prophet was on a mount. And Sayyidina Abu Hurairah was on the ground, not on the mount. And so he asked the Prophet, told Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, he told him, get up here with me. So he tries to get up, all right? Sayyidina Abu Hurairah tries to get up, can't, and him and the Prophet fall down off the mount. okay? Until the Prophet gets back on the mount, all right? And he looks at him. Get up here with me, right? He tries to get on again, gets tangled with the Prophet ﷺ, and they both fall off again, all right? And then he gets back on the mount, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He looks at Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and he says that, get up here with me. And this time, Abu Hurairah says to the Prophet ﷺ, I'm not going to make you fall a third time, look, all right? And he declines to get up there. But the point is, look at his humility, right? Look at his humility. He didn't expect a special treatment in terms of, the way he would go somewhere, his mount, he would let people ride with him, he would let his companions, he didn't distinguish himself from his companions. He never distinguished himself from his companions. In a narration, there's a narration of the Prophet ﷺ, him and his companions were on a trip, and they stopped to make camp, and they were divvying up the tasks. One person said, I'll make the food. One person said, I'll do this. Other person said, I do that, right? And then the Prophet ﷺ said, what? He said that, I'll get the firewood. And they were like, you don't have to do anything. Like, there's plenty of us. We'll find, we can take care of it. And he said, no. Allah doesn't like it when someone distinguishes themselves, right, from their companions. Like, what makes me so special that I can't go help out with the chores that you all have, and you guys all have to serve me? So that's the kind of man he was in his humility, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He used to visit the sick, follow the funeral procession, and respond to the invitation of the slave. He, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, would mend his own sandals, sew his clothes, and help his family in their household needs. So he wouldn't just visit the sick. He wouldn't just go to funerals. He would ask his companions, who is sick so I can visit them? Who has passed away so that I can go visit their funeral, right? There are narrations where after Salah, he would turn to his companions and ask them this, who amongst you knows someone sick I can visit? Who amongst you knows someone who's passed away I can go and see their funeral? And if no one had anything, he would say, who amongst you has a need I can take care of? Who needs to talk to me? And if nothing else, right, he would say, who has a dream? They can tell me their dream, right? So this is the kind of humility he had. A person, the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. The spread of the message of Islam rested on his shoulders, right? Spreading this message to all the corners of the world was an obligation upon him. And he knew how precious his time was and the enormity of that task. And despite all of that, okay, he was humble, and he spent time with the people. And he spent time with his companions, and he never transgressed their rights. It was never, I'm too important to take care of this. I'm too important to spend time with you, no matter who it was. Some people, okay, this gets to their head. Their status in life, if they get to a certain point in their life, their status gets to their head, and they can't make time for anyone. They can't make time for anyone, let alone their family. The Prophet ﷺ narrated in hadith, in the Shema al-Tirmidhi, it's narrated that he used to split his time up in his household into thirds. A third for Allah. He would give a third of his time in his house to Allah Ta'ala, to worship Him, read the Quran, make dhikr, istighfar. And he gave a third of his time to his family. A whole third of his time to his family. Okay? Now this is someone that his attention is demanded 24/7. Okay? Ask anyone who has a job that requires that kind of attention. Whether there is some sort of like an ER doctor or some sort of surgeon, or ask Sheikh Yahya how his time is, right? 24/7, they're on call for something to happen. They have to give something their attention, okay? People knock on their doors with demands, with things to questions, things to be taken care of. Things come up in the middle of the night, someone's funeral, this happened, whatever happened, they have to take care of it, okay? Despite all of that, he still gave a whole third of his time to his family. And so where did the time come to take care of all these things that would come up? From his own time. The last third of his time, he would split it in half, give half of it to the needs of the people who used to come to his house, asking, needing things, needing his attention, needing his help. And the last half-third, the last sixth, was for himself. To rest, take care of his needs, maybe sew his clothes, take some chores, do some chores, things like that. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he never let his status get to his head. He was humble from the beginning of his life until the end of his life. from the beginning of his life to the end of his life, to the point where even people used to visit him from his childhood. It's narrated that, for example, his wet nurse, Halima Sa'adiyah, her daughter, not even her daughter, so his sister in nursing, used to come and visit him. And when she came to visit him, he would spread out his own shawl for her to sit on and take care of her and see if she needs anything. He told her, look, if you want to stay, you can live here and we'll take care of you. Or if you want to go back to Bani Sa'd and live with them and the Bedouins, you're free to do so as well. And she chose to leave. He even honored his other wet nurse, his other net worth, Thuwayba, who was the freed slave of Abu Lahab. Thuwayba radiyallahu anha. So he would honor her as well. He would honor the woman, an old freed slave. She wet nursed him when he was a baby, and he would honor him to the end of her life, to the point where even after she passed away, he would still take care of, he would still ask, does she have any kin left alive that I can go see, that I can take care of? And he was told she has no, there's no next of kin, she has no family. To that extent was his humility, that no matter how important he still made time to make sure people's needs were met and that he didn't transgress other people's rights. The Prophet ﷺ's companions would not rise for him because they knew his dislike for that. When he passed by young children, he would greet them. A man was brought to the Prophet ﷺ's presence and felt frightened due to his awe. Whereupon the Prophet ﷺ said to him, be at ease, I am not a king. I am but a son of a woman from Quraysh who eats cured meat. The Prophet ﷺ would sit amongst his companions and intermingle with them as if he was one of them. When a stranger would come, he would not know which of them is the Prophet ﷺ until he asked about it. If someone entered a gathering of the Prophet ﷺ, he was so similar to his companions, they didn't know who he was. They couldn't pick him out from the crowd. They couldn't pick out the Prophet of God from the crowd. Meaning he didn't wear anything that made him stood out. No fancy clothing. He dressed like his companions. His companions were poor. His companions were really poor. So he dressed like them. He sat like them. He ate like them. Just the fact that he would spend time with them is a testament to his humility. How many people, as they get busier in life, they don't even make time for their friends and family. But he would do all of that. A stranger would come in and not know which of them was the Prophet ﷺ. Because of this, the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ to sit in such a way that he would be recognized by a stranger. And so they constructed for him a mud bench that he sat upon. Aisha radiyallahu anha said to the Prophet ﷺ, eat while reclining, and may God make a sacrifice on your behalf, for it is easier for you. So in this narration, the Prophet ﷺ, he's someone who is, he was probably ill or later on in his life. And she's telling him, eat in a way where you're reclining, it's easier for you. Don't have to set up to eat. Because as you guys remember in your class on the etiquettes of eating, right? He would never recline and eat, because that's a characteristic of someone who's it's like arrogance, okay? So he said, the Prophet ﷺ replied whilst inclining his head until his forehead nearly touched the ground, saying, nay, rather I eat as a servant eats and sit as a servant sits. He never ate off a tray or a bowl until he met God, Azza wa Jal. No one of his companions or anyone else invited him, but that he said, at your service. So anyone who called his name, he would respond with the phrase labbaik. He responded with the phrase labbaik. In Arabic, labbaik is a phrase used to denote that you're at someone's service, at your service. I am at your service. That's why the Hajjaj, when they go on Hajj, what are they saying? They're saying, labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Allah, we are at your service. We are here to serve you. So anyone who called the Prophet ﷺ, no matter who it was, he would respond what? Labbaik, I am at your service. This is the Prophet of Allah. The final messenger, the greatest of creation, would respond in that way to people. He wouldn't say, what? What do you need? How's it going? What's good? No, he would say, labbaik, I'm at your service. When he sat with the people and they spoke about the hereafter, he participated with them. When they spoke about food or drink, he did likewise. And when they spoke about worldly matters, he did likewise, all out of kindness and humility towards them. This is someone who knew the future. He knew the future, right? There are even narrations, right, where he knew how certain companions of his will die. So he knew things, and these things were heavy on him. Even in narrations, there said that he would say things like, if you all knew what I knew, you would cry a lot and not laugh much. But despite all of that, he would still do what? Spend time with his companions and his family members in a way that made them happy, in a way that made them smile. He didn't put his, what he knew that was burdensome, that was a responsibility, on their shoulders and ruin their day, and ruin their disposition. There are things that he had to bear, and he bore them without telling us. And his humility was such that if someone came to him with a joke, with the thing to talk about, there was no, I'm just so overwhelmed with this and that. This is not a good time. No, he would be there for them and join them in whatever they had to say of jokes or good news or something like that. The companions would occasionally recite poetry or rehearse poetry in his presence and humorously recall events that took place in the pre-Islamic period of ignorance. The Prophet ﷺ would smile as they would laugh and did not rebuke them except for what was unlawful. So the only time he actually rebuked his companions or family members when it comes to spending time with them is if what they said went into the realm of what's unlawful or haram. And he was someone, ﷺ, who never said no. He never said no. And this is something that a lot of the pious have taken up as well. And in fact, it's ingrained in most Muslim cultures, right? If you're Muslim, okay, if you grew up in a Muslim culture and you probably experienced this, and you go to someone and you ask them, I'm having this at my house tomorrow night, can you make it? What are they going to say? Inshallah. They're going to say, inshallah. What does that mean, right? That's their cultural emulation of this Prophet's characteristic. He would never say no. So he would never break anyone's heart. He would either say, yes, I'm coming, or yes, take this. Can you do this for me? Yes. Or if he couldn't do it, he didn't want to break anyone's heart, so he would just, let them go, let them down smoothly, or just not act, or something like that. So culturally, our Muslim cultures that have been Islam for long periods of time, have been Muslim for long periods of time, they took this trait on, which is why in most of the Muslim world, when something like this happens, what happens? Inshallah, right? Inshallah, right? And it's just them culturally emulating the Prophet's characteristics and his attributes, which is a good lesson. Because many people, they hate this thing about their culture. They say just say no. No, don't say no. It's sunnah to not say no. It's sunnah to say, inshallah, the person, they'll understand the point. Okay, you're going to try to make it, you would if you can, but you can't, it's okay, right? So he was someone who never said no and never broke anyone's heart. He always gave people what they asked for, and he was someone who did all this from the moment he was born to the moment he passed away. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. With that said, I think we have a few minutes for questions, or no? 2 minutes to fit as many questions as you guys can in 2 minutes. Tafaddalu. Yes.
So you say that the Prophet ﷺ, we cannot distinguish him from a gathering.
Yeah.
Yet, people were so awestruck when he saw them. Assalamu alaikum. So we say that the Prophet ﷺ, it was difficult to distinguish him from a gathering because he was so similar to his companions. Yet people were so awestruck when they saw them. I sense just a little bit of a dichotomy. And
yeah, that's a good question. So basically, what they mean by that, when they couldn't distinguish him in a gathering, is that you would expect someone who's a prophet of God, who's leading a city, to present himself in a certain way. Right? Even in our context, if I were to tell you, okay, we're going to go and see, I don't know, some leader somewhere, okay? You would expect what? They're sitting somewhere in a way that's elevated, fancier, the way they dress is different, right? But this person, the Prophet was not like that, okay? Now, there's no contradiction here. Why? Because how many times have you been to a gathering like this, for example? Everyone's just in rows, right? Facing the same direction or something, right? And you see someone in the crowd and you're like, wow, that person, something special about them, right? But there's nothing that outwardly makes them different. They're dressed like you, they're seated like you, they're eating like you, right? And then later you find out, oh, they're so-and-so, they've done that, you know what I mean? that reason, the thing that caught your eye about them became manifest later. It's something that was inward in them, or something that was part of their character, or their, their manaqib, or their good traits, or something like that. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. So we hear that the Prophet ﷺ was Sadiq al-Wa'd al-Amin, but we also hear that at that time the Arabs were known to be people of their word and they didn't lie. Yeah. So sometimes I wonder, like, how does one get such a title in the people who are already known for their trustworthiness or truthfulness?
That's the miraculous nature of his character. That even amongst the people who were known to be people of their word, who were trustworthy, he was at a whole different level, such that the people themselves would call him the trustworthy one. That's the miraculous nature of his character. Okay, think about this. Okay, when he was making hijrah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his hijrah was delayed because people, despite Quraysh essentially waging war against him, okay, despite Quraysh, bothering him, torturing him and his companions and everything, right? Despite all of that, and they called him a sorcerer, called him terrible things, right? Despite all of that, they would still give him their wealth to take care of. And it was to the point where he couldn't even make hijrah because he was too busy giving away all the deposits of wealth that people asked him to look after. That was the kind of man he was, okay? When Sayyidina Zayd bin Harith, the young man who was in his company and part of his, lived with him for a long period of time, when he was a child, he was gifted to him, right? And then at a certain point in his life, in Sayyidina Zayd's life, his father came and found him, okay? So his father came from the Levant, from Sham, with a few of his family members, and were like, oh, we finally found you, Zayd. You've been gone all these years. Let's go back home, okay? And what did Zayd ibn Harith say? He said, now I want to say what the Prophet ﷺ. His own father came and found him after years being apart, okay? This was a boy who was sold into slavery, okay? His father found him and was like, let's go back home. And then the boy was like, no, I want to stay with the Prophet ﷺ. That's the kind of man he was. So his character really is something that, as much as we can read about it, as much as we can try to understand it, but maybe like, it's something else. It doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense. On the day he conquered Mecca, he rode into Mecca. His face was so low of humility, his beard was touching his saddle. Okay, but the people of Mecca knew everything they did to him. Right? They knew the terrible war crimes, the torture, all the terrible things they did. They took confiscated wealth and property. Terrible, terrible things, okay? And they knew he was going to forgive them. They knew he was going to forgive them. So his character was something else. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak alayhi wa ala alihi. Alhamdulillah for an opportunity like this where we have really just 2-3 days to just dedicate ourselves to learning about his beautiful and blessed virtues, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At this time, we'll take just a brief break, inshallah, between now and the next session 9 with Sheikh Yahya on the external form of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we just ask that everyone try to be back in their seats roughly by 11:12 or so. The session will start at 11:15. So that gives us about 8-9 minutes to freshen up, take care of any needs, inshallah. Hopefully, the sound of the next qasida will welcome you in. So you'll hear that as the cue for when to return to your seats. Barakallahu feekum.